Classic Country, AM 1450 here on this Tuesday. Time to talk sports. Virginia Sports with Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online. And Chris, college football coming up, another big weekend. Obviously coming up next weekend at the ACC, Miami UVA. I believe the ESPN's going to televise that ball game. And now it's just a matter for the Cavaliers to show up and really give Miami a game.
Yeah, and good luck to them in that respect. It's going to be tough for them. You know, this is a team that they have feasted upon their lower level opposition. They got 3 wins, so it's, you know, give them credit. It can be tough to win those games. You don't always win those games, but that all said, you know, they've struggled in their games against upper level opposition. Let's say, you know, the Florida State game, the Georgia Tech game, the Carolina game. They not only lost all 3 of those, but they really weren't competitive in any of those 3 games. Maybe the most competitive they were was the Georgia Tech game, and they gave up 477 yards on the ground in that game. So. That could be the bugaboo. I don't know. You know, Miami. You know, with their quarterback Corey Harris, they seem to like to throw the ball well. This Virginia team is most vulnerable with its running defense. They gave up 290 yards against Eastern Michigan on Saturday. So that would seem to be the weak point that Miami could exploit if they're patient enough to exploit it. Virginia's hope would be that, you know, maybe they can shore up enough of their run defense against the Hurricanes and make Ja'Cory Harris put the ball in the air. And if Rosai Dowling can get healthy, he's not really been a consistent performer on the field this year. A guy who's a potential first-round pick in the NFL draft next April has really not been a factor for this team through the first 7 games. But if he can get out there and join Chase Minifield, who's been playing some pretty good defense on the other corner, and they can maybe force a couple of turnovers, that's what the Cavs have to hope for, is to, you know, not turn the ball over like they did against Carolina a couple weeks ago. 5 turnovers, 5 interceptions in that game. They have to keep care of the ball themselves and maybe give Ja'Cory Harris, who seems to like to throw the pick every so often on his own right, you know, get him to throw the ball in the air a couple of times and put it up for grabs. That's the way the Cavs have to win this game. It's going to have to be through a power running game, you know, low turnovers and you know, take Miami's running game away and maybe get a pick or 2. That said, that's a tough game plan to execute, given that Miami has probably, you know, they have a speed advantage on both sides of the ball, and they have a pretty good running game as well. So the Cavs have a limited window here, but they do have a window that they can maybe open up and play on Saturday.
Hokies got a big win over Duke. What's the future hold for Virginia Tech right now, you think?
Well, they're off this weekend, and then they play Thursday night next week. They host Carolina. They host... they have. I'll have to look this up real quick, Jim. I know they're on the road at Carolina this year, but they have that. You know, Thursday night in Blacksburg is always a big game for the Hokies. You know, they seem to. You know, I think they lost their first Thursday night game, and that was back in '95. They had Boston College when they were still both in the Big East, but they've not. I don't think they've lost since on a Thursday night. The Hokies, and they're actually. Yeah, they got Georgia Tech coming to town on Thursday, November 4th. Huge game, obviously. They got the stretch right now. I mean, this is their murderer's row. You know, Virginia has played a similar stretch. You know, Virginia had Florida State, North Carolina, and then the week with Eastern Michigan and now Miami. The Hokies have Georgia Tech, and then on the 13th of November they have at North Carolina, then the 20th at Miami. This is the stretch where we'll see if this Hokies team, which has rebounded pretty well from that the 0-2 start, the loss to James Madison, which is totally inexplicable at this point now with JMU having lost 3 games. They've done well. You know, they've obviously won 6 straight games. They're starting to dominate like people expected them to. You know, the last 2 weeks, 52-21 over Wake Forest and 44-7 over Duke. But this is where we'll see where this Hokies team really is. You know, Georgia Tech coming in on a Thursday night. I think Georgia Tech's probably a wounded team. They obviously lost over the weekend to Clemson, and this Georgia Tech team is not rising to that level, I think, that some people thought they could be. You know, I remember Paul Johnson at the ACC kickoff back in July talking about how he had 15 starters returning, and that even though the media was giving a lot of the attention to Virginia Tech and giving them the nod as the team expected to win the Coastal, he thought his team was right there. Well, they're not. They're a step back right now, but there's a chance for his team to come out on a Thursday night in front of a national TV audience and say, hey, we're back. So big game for those 2 teams, and then really a big stretch for the Hokies here. If they can go, you know, obviously if they can go undefeated in that stretch, they finish up with Virginia. You know, what some people, including I think we talked about on this radio show a few weeks ago, said, even with that 0-2 start, they can still win the ACC. It's in the Hokies' court right now. All they got to do is go out and win these games, and they can win the ACC, and that'd be amazing after that loss to JMU.
And other big game in the ACC, a few other games taking place, obviously. The big one, it looks like it's going to be Florida State and NC State.
Florida State, NC State, yes, that's a game that's key in that the Atlantic Division. This is a Florida State team that I think, except for that slip up, that little bit of a hiccup, you can say maybe against Boston College, has looked like the dominant team, maybe conference-wide, certainly in that Atlantic Division, with the way they've played since that loss to Oklahoma early in the season. They've been really, really, consistently a good team. NC State has had its run. I mean, they were unbeaten a few weeks back and had Virginia Tech down 17-0 in the second quarter and couldn't hold on at home in Raleigh. But this is still a team that Tom O'Brien, I think, has to think is loaded for a shot here. If they can win this game, they can put themselves in position to win that Atlantic Division. So, for Florida State, it's a chance to prove themselves against a high-level opponent again, and for NC State, maybe a chance. The Tom O'Brien, this is his fourth season there in Raleigh. He's been hearing some of the whispers. He came to Raleigh from Boston College, another ACC school, where he had won consistently. He's not won at NC State. Here's a chance for him to prove that he's got a winning team down there, and that could be a very interesting football game. I think that could be the game of the weekend, actually, in the ACC.
Big South action. VMI got a big win at Charleston Southern. Now VMI travels to take on Army in non-conference action this weekend, and JMU lost another tough one. And as we talked about really the last couple of weeks on this show, the Dukes, their margin for error getting less and less.
Yeah, margin for error getting less and less. They got UMass this weekend, and that's another tough one. I mean, all these teams in the CAA, it seems, except for Towson. Of course, JMU struggled with Towson when they beat them a couple weeks ago. Are ranked, or were preseason ranked, or on the fringe of being ranked. And gosh, what a season! They beat Virginia Tech early, and it looked like they were going to run through. And they even beat Liberty, and Liberty is probably a team that's going to play in that NCAA tournament as well. But right
it's going to be frustrating, too, because a lot of these losses have been close losses. I mean, extremely close losses.
Yeah, and the frustrating thing is that the offense is not playing, and that's what Mickey's talked about. That's been the most surprising. I mean, they did well in that Virginia Tech game. I mean, they scored 21 points and scored 14 in the second half. They had two great drives. They ran the clock out in the last 6 minutes of that game when they got their hands on the ball after that last turnover. And you're thinking that, gosh, if they can do that to Virginia Tech, what are they going to do to those CAA teams? Not that they, moved up and down the field against Tech, but they scored when they needed to, and they're not scoring when they need to in these games. 14-7 loss at Villanova in a game that, they looked like they had chances. They had, every opportunity. Villanova missed a 23-yard chip shot field goal late that would have sealed the game and gave JMU one last breath, and, they moved down to the 35-yard line and throw an interception in the end zone in the last play of the game. It's just they've had opportunities. They got a senior quarterback in Drew Dudzig. They've got some weapons out there at receiver. Daquan Scott, a guy that we were familiar with from high school football in the area here. Quentin Hunter, another guy that we might be familiar with from regional football, at least. Their AA teams, a guy from over on the other side of the mountains. I had played at UVA for a couple of years. They've got weapons. They've got, people in place. They're just not doing it, And that pistol offense that works so well against Virginia Tech is not working against CAA teams. And it's just hard to figure. That's the head scratch because the defense is doing its job. It's just the offense is just not playing football. It's hard to figure.
Hey, Chris, high school real quick. Another big weekend coming up, and Friday coming up in the Southern Valley District. And then you look at the latest point standings right now, and it looks pretty good overall for Stuart Straft and Lee. Looks good for Wilson if they can run the table, because it looks like right now for Wilson's situation, they're going to have to beat Fort Defiance and Lee on the road to win the district outright, because if they don't win the district outright, I don't think they get into the playoffs because they played so many single A schools. Yeah,
that's their weakness, and of course they go out and beat Draft in the big county rivalry game last week, but they're still in that position because, as you mentioned, that early season schedule is not favorable to them for playoff positioning, and that's going to be a tough reality for them if they get to that stage. And say they beat Fort and lose to Lee, and maybe lose a 1 or 2 point game to Lee, and they end up, I guess, will be 4-1 in the district, but don't go to the playoffs, and some teams who have 2 or 3 losses in the district go. That would be the lesson, I guess, is your lesson is you don't play a bunch of single A teams. And of course, I think they're making that move back to single A next year. But that would be a hard lesson because it'd be disheartening for that group to go 4-1 in the district if that would be the case, and go out and not be a playoff team. But their destiny's in their hands. They can't say anything at this point about that. They have Fort and they have Lee, and They've done what they needed to do so far. So if you're Derek McDaniel, the coach there, you're in the position you probably want to be in. You still got to go out and win the football games, and who wants to back their way into the playoffs anyway? So it'd be a great way to go out, obviously, if they're able to pull that off and win the district and go to the playoffs and their swan song as they move back to single A. That'd be saying a lot right there for the future of that program, I think.
Hey, Chris, one last thing. I know we'll be talking more about this in the coming months, but college basketball, right now to you, how does the ACC shape up, and how high can Virginia Tech go, you think?
Virginia Tech can go. I think they can be in the top 4, top 5. I don't see anybody in the ACC contending again with Duke, and Carolina's getting a lot of preseason nods. I saw a top 10 preseason ranking for that team. I'm wondering about that. It's a team that last year underachieved big time. They were in the NIT, and for Carolina to play in the NIT is a big deal. So I'm wondering about everybody except for Duke. Duke is obviously an established entity. We know what they're going to do this year. Unless they have just a catastrophic run of injuries, they're going to be ACC champs and a Final Four contender once again. But outside of that, there's a lot of flux. You got new coaches at Wake Forest and Clemson. You've got the uncertainty around North Carolina. Can those guys that were pretty well-regarded recruits, can they play above what they did last year? Virginia Tech in this mix, and when you start thinking about all this stuff, Virginia Tech in this mix can push themselves up. Maybe they can be a number 2 or number 3 team in the conference if they have depth. They have senior leadership. Malcolm Delaney's back. He's in my mind, if he's not a contender for best player in the ACC, he's certainly one of the best 2 or 3 players in the ACC. He's a pro player. He's an NBA guy when he decides to when he'll leave after the season. So Tech can be in the mix. I don't think there's any question that Tech can be in the mix. And, I saw in the preseason rankings, Virginia, on the other hand, the writers regarding them as the 11th best team in a 12-team ACC. I think there's a reason for that. There's been a lot of turnover there at Virginia. Tony Bennett basically cleaned house in the offseason, and he has, I think, 6 recruits coming in that, we don't know what they're going to do. They're well-regarded recruits. That was a recruiting class that the lowest ranking I saw for their recruiting class was 14th by Rivals, I think it was, in the country. So it's a recruiting haul that could pay dividends down the road. It's just a matter of how quick can those guys gel. It's a bunch of guys playing together for the first time. Can they gel quick enough to put themselves in a position to win in the ACC consistently and put themselves in a position to be in an NCAA tournament, at least on the bubble or something like that for that. So they could be a year away. But Virginia Tech, I think they're ready this year. I mean, the fan base is expecting it. After last year's snub by the NCAA, I think anything less than an NCAA tournament bid, and Hokies fans will be very, very displeased with this season.
Okay, Chris, what do we look for in the coming days in the Augusta Free Press and also Virginia Sports Online?
Well, we'll get folks ready for that Virginia-Miami game. I'll be there in Scott Stadium on Saturday. The last of 3 straight home Saturdays for us. We staff those games in person. I'm in the press box, and I blog, and I write columns and stories and do podcasts and everything. It's a tiring process, 3 straight weeks, and here we got the big game with Miami. But we're getting folks ready for that, and we'll see what else we can get into as far as the local football scene and off weekend for the Hokies. But we're a couple weeks away from the start of college basketball, so a lot to keep up with here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, Chris Graham with the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online right there. Do appreciate his time talking Virginia sports, high school, college football, and a little college basketball as well. And we'll come back for more of Online here on this Tuesday right after this.